Not being fully compliant with anti-money laundering and terrorist financing standards has landed South Africa and Nigeria on the grey list. The Financial Action Task Force says more work is needed to increase investigations and prosecutions of money laundering, as well as the seizure of assets due to crimes. But for more on this, I'm now joined by James George. He's the compliance manager at Compli-Serve and editor of Juta CompliNews. James, thank you for your time and good afternoon to you. I think first let's start here. The grey listing of South Africa. When you heard that announcement, did it come as a surprise to you?
It was not a huge surprise, and thank you very much for inviting me this afternoon. It was not a surprise. I had been anticipating this for around 12 months or so. But I think it's important to realize, and I think people, is not as dire at the moment as people may think. It is not a sanction. It's a warning. It's essentially a big wake-up call to our country that we must start to eat the frog. In other words, no more procrastinating around intensifying and working on our rule books, etc. We need to act now. And the imperative is actually to get off the list as soon as we possibly can. But there was no surprise at all in the fact that we were grey listed at 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon.
So what happens next? What are the next steps that South Africa needs to take?
Right. So essentially, the Financial Action Task Force has given the country until the end of January 2025 to fix 8 strategic deficiencies related to the implementation of our anti-money laundering and combating of financing of terrorism laws. Now, we have taken some great strides towards the end of last year when there was some further promulgation of 2 bills, the General Laws Anti-Money Laundering Amendment bills, together with our anti-terrorism POC Act laws and amendments. Those came into force at the end of the year. So we've made some great headway, if you like, in addressing some of the deficiencies as outlined by the FATF. But we do, thankfully, have high-level political commitment on the part of the South African government now to work with the FATF and the Southern African body that's working underneath it to strengthen our effectiveness of our regime. And that includes 8, apparently there's 8, if you like, high-risk areas and legal frameworks for terrorist financing and that we need to work on. So, for example, we've got to demonstrate a sustained increase in outbound money laundering requests that help facilitate money laundering investigations and confiscations of different types of assets in line with our risk profile, improve risk-based supervision of non-financial service entities. So in other words, there's a whole raft of new accountable institutions that have come onto stream now that need to now comply with the FICA Act and other acts that were amended recently, and demonstrate that all AML, anti-money laundering and terrorist financing supervisors apply effective, proportionate sanctions for non-compliance. Just quickly ensuring that competent authorities have timely access to accurate and up-to-date beneficial ownership information, demonstrating a sustained increase in law enforcement agencies' requests for financial intelligence from our Financial Intelligence Center. And so there's a whole raft of measures, and targeted financial sanctions is another big one.
Yeah. So James, we're definitely getting a sense here that it's not necessarily the consumers or, Nigerians or South Africans directly affected by this. Perhaps even over time, as Dr. Azad Jamin once said to me, our economist right here on ENCA said, perhaps over time, South Africans and Nigerians will feel the impact of this. But directly affected, though, the banks, financial institutions, investors, they have to tighten up, right? Especially when it comes to compliance, and also ensure that they do check that checklist you just mentioned, those 8 items that are of concern to this international watchdog body.
I would just like to say as well that what's the fallout going to be, this grey listing? How is it going to harm our country's ability, etc.? And I think the main one, which has been overlooked by a number of commentators, is decreased international credibility. The longer we remain on the grey list, it's going to harm our reputation. We're going to become less attractive to foreign investors, and that could ultimately cause, obviously, harm to our country's economy and financial institutions. And then we've got increased scrutiny from financial institutions offshore. I mean, they've got specific rule books that state if a country is grey listed, we now have to conduct a more robust, enhanced due diligence exercise on South African clients. Unfortunately, everyone's going to be in the same boat there. If we're going to be dealing internationally, these foreign institutions are going to carry out quite extensive EDD or enhanced due diligence. And then there's increased costs for financial transactions. Arguably, there'd be reduced foreign investment. Yeah, so all of these together with potentially some revisions to GDP growth estimates into the future. I've seen everything from 0.1% decrease in our GDP to even highs of 3% to GDP the longer we stay on the grey list. So I think it's all about how long are we going to be on this grey list for. If we are only on the grey list for 12 to 18 months, it's not going to be that material. But if we are going to be in the same boat as, say, Yemen or South Sudan or Iran or a number of these other jurisdictions that were on the grey list, it's going to have a tremendous effect on our economy, and it's all going to be negative. So the sooner we get off, the better it's going to be. So we need really a Mauritian type exercise.
But it leads me to my next question, if you may allow me to ask. I mean, I remember listening to the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, mentioning that, yes, they are hoping for the best, expecting the worst, but there seems to be Plan B, the minister said. So do you have confidence, James, that we will find a way to tackle illicit financial flows in the country? Do you have faith that those recommendations by the Zondo Commission will be implemented thoroughly enough to convince the international market as well as the watchdog, obviously FATC, that we can get out of this grey listing?
It all depends at the pace in which we handle the existing technical compliance areas that we need to meet, the various standards of the Financial Action Task Force. And it's not only that, it's demonstrating that we have implemented these new measures effectively, and that conceivably could lead to a delay in coming off the grey list. But look, we need to look at a country like Mauritius, I mean, which inspires one with inspiration. They went onto the grey list, and they were only on it for about 18 months, which I believe to this day is still a record for a country that's actually gone onto the grey list and haven't come off it in record time. Normally, you're on the grey list for 3 to 5 years in most instances. So they did a tremendous job in actually coming off that grey list just shy of 2 years. And that was through a collective effort in government support and working closely with the private sector, reinforcing existing AML-CTF legislation. And it went onto the list with their scorecard looking rather bleak, rather like ours. It was like we failed on 20 out of 40 on 20 of the 40 technical standards. They didn't pass on all of the immediate outcome standards, for example, but they came off that list and are now compliant with 39 out of 40 FATF recommendations. And then to remain, it's all very well and good doing that, but they remain compliant. They have very proactive and ongoing process in place. There's buy-in from every sector of government, every sector of the economy.
And I suppose those are lessons that we can take from Mauritius, James. Unfortunately, that's all the time I had with you. I wish we had more to tackle this conversation further, but thank you so much for making time for us. Compli-Serve's James George, thank you for your time right here on ENCA.